Good morning, politics fans. I'm Brent Johnshon of NJ Advanced Media, and we are here for our, let's turn into a weekly live politics chat. Today's topic is Governor Chris Christie's future. Is he going to run for president? When will he run for president? What does that mean? Can he win? I am joined by the two men who cover Governor Chris Christie for NJ Advanced Media, Claude Brodesser-Akner and Matthew Arco, or Matt Arco, I guess is what your byline says. Last week was a big week for Governor Christie. He spent months on the campaign trail as chairman of the Republican Governors Association, campaigning for Republican gubernatorial candidates. And on Tuesday, he saw a number of Republicans win in key states. A lot of experts say that has boosted his chances for the presidency. So let's get right to it. Will Chris Christie run for president, and when will he decide to do so?
Matt, you want to take that?
Sure. So I think maybe the diplomatic and very conservative way to say it is that he hasn't ruled himself out. I mean, I think at this point a lot of folks would be very surprised if he doesn't announce that he's running for president. The governor has said that he's going to decide next year. Maybe that means early next year. But again, I think it's safe to say that he, I mean, a lot of folks would be surprised if he doesn't announce that he's running. And in the words of Rudy Giuliani for an article we wrote a few months ago, he certainly hasn't ruled it out by all the action that he's taken in the months leading up to this time.
How big of a week was last week in terms of Election Day for Christie? And what does that mean for 2016?
Well, if I can jump in, I think one of the things that the success did, and there was a lot of success, there was a few races where they came up short, but it did change the conversation away from scandals, problems in the state, problems with personality, to this is a guy who could win. You know, the wins in Florida, in Michigan and Illinois were enormously important, not just because they handed Republican governors the control of the state house, but also because they allowed him to get repeated exposure. I mean, I think Christie went 8 times to Florida, at least 5 or 6 times, maybe as many as 8 to Illinois, to get repeated exposure to the ground game of how you win an election, a statewide election. And that's hugely helpful on a presidential level when you go to run, if you go to run in his case. And you know, it also, I think, you know, talking to Republican operatives who have run campaigns previously for presidential candidates, they came away with the impression that it sends the message, kind of inoculates him against criticism that he's not conservative enough for the right wing of the party. By winning in these states, he sort of shows you can either be ideologically pure or you can have the presidency. And I think that's a very tantalizing prospect after 8 years of Democratic rule for Republicans.
One thing we haven't heard much of lately is the George Washington Bridge scandal. Just a few months ago, some people thought that would be Christie's undoing, and we haven't seen any indictments come down. The local legislative investigation hasn't held a hearing in more than a month. And one reader, Janet Swanborn, wants to know, when can Christie breathe regarding to the Bridge scandal? Have we gotten to that point, or might this rear its head again in the future and hurt his chances in 2016?
If there's a federal investigation, we don't know exactly where it is, and we probably won't ever really know where it is, depending on what the outcome is. If there's any indictments, then we'll obviously know the outcome of that. But if it's, it's going to be hard to tell. There's really no timeline. Can Chris Christie breathe? I mean, he says that he's had absolutely nothing to do with it. So, he's just waiting for everything to smooth over, and he's going to have his moment to tell everybody, I told you so. I had nothing to do with it. But the conversation has switched. With lack of anything new, that's sort of in the rearview mirror now.
He said it will end up a footnote in his career. He said that a few months ago. This will end up a footnote. Can we say that's going to be the case now, or we're not out of the woods yet?
Well, no. I mean, I don't think you can say one way or the other right now, because there's still investigations going on as far as we know, right? So there could be something else that comes out of it. We know that polls say, though, that voters in New Jersey, at least, don't put a lot of stock into what New Jersey lawmakers are doing in the State House investigating the George Washington Bridge scandal. So, I mean, with the lack of, it's really just up to the federal investigations now to see what they yield. And again, Governor Christie says that he's had nothing to do with it. So, maybe he's been breathing a sigh of relief for months now. But
yeah, I mean, I would agree with Matt to say that it's a little early to call this. I mean, there are 3 open investigations, not just into Bridgegate, but into misappropriation of funds for the Pulaski Skyway. The SEC has an investigation. The Manhattan District Attorney has an investigation. The U.S. Attorney has an investigation. And none of them are finished. So no one wants to run for president with that sort of stuff hanging over their head. I'm sure Chris Christie would love to have a final report that exonerates him completely, and he can just run ahead with this and say anyone brings it up is just, trying to tar him with a brush that's not appropriate. But as far as we know, the investigations continue, and I wouldn't heave a huge sigh of relief yet. I mean, he says he had nothing to do with it. I guess he can sleep fine, but no one wants to run for president with federal and state investigations open.
I have a few more questions on 2016, but I want to talk about New Jersey. He's still the governor of New Jersey. We can talk all we want about the White House, and he has a few big issues that are facing him, such as pension reform and the struggling New Jersey pension system for public workers, Atlantic City and the struggles there. He was in Atlantic City yesterday, and sports betting, Reggie, all types of things going on. What does he have to worry about here first before he looks at the White House?
You rattled off like a handful of the top issues that's facing the state right now. As far as pension goes, that's something that sort of put Christie in the national GOP spotlight a few years ago. So we can expect something to be coming around the bend in terms of pension. He's been leading us up to this moment. His Pension Review Commission should be releasing its findings sometime in the near future. In terms of AC, he was in AC today. He'll be in AC tomorrow for part 2 of the AC Summit to figure out how to save Atlantic City. So we can expect the governor to kind of follow through with some of those things leading up to this time. I mean, he's got to be, if he does announce that he's running for president, he does run for president, you're going to have fellow Republicans, just like anybody else, like Democrats too, kind of looking into his record. So he has stuff that he needs to take care of here at home, and we can expect him to focus on that, I'm sure.
Well, let's talk about
before we jump ahead, Brent, I was going to say, in some ways, the local stuff is the national stuff. I mean, I think if you notice the battles that Scott Walker fought in Wisconsin, Scott Walker, the Republican governor of Wisconsin, fought against state employees unions there. Almost no Republican running for president ever is hurt by bashing unions of any kind. And in a sense, Christie is saying that these unions have to take cuts. The pensions are not sustainable under the current contribution model. That's true. But it's also true that taking this on is not just a state, it's also one that pays political dividends on a national level. That if he's seen as taking a hard line with the unions and capping spending and that sort of thing, it plays well with the Republican base that he's trying to woo, or ostensibly trying to woo if he does declare.
Okay, 2 more questions on 16 before we leave. Who is his toughest competition? And there's a lot of talk of Jeb Bush maybe entering the race. And does Christie actually have a chance at winning the Republican nomination for president?
In terms of competition, so, a lot of polls have showed us that the GOP presidential field is essentially wide open, right? So his toughest competition, I mean, that's hard to say. It depends who jump in. Jeb Bush is a popular, tough competitor. He makes that list just because he's sort of more moderate like Chris Christie. A lot of folks also, in recent stories in recent months, have indicated that if Jeb Bush jumped in terms of just being fundraisers, they would have a difficult time deciding who they go with. A lot of folks are loyal to the Bush family, who Chris Christie may be courting to be in his corner for that. So that could be problematic a little bit, possibly. Governor Scott Walker, somebody else who just won re-election in Wisconsin, he is, he also, like Christie, got a name in the Republican Party for taking a hard line against public worker unions. So that could be somebody that can kind of maybe steal Christie's thunder, vice versa. So it's sort of those more moderate wing of the party and also folks who kind of have gotten their same name within the Republican Party that Christie had, years ago when he was during his first term.
I would add to that you could probably add Chris Christie's name to that list, that his biggest competition is Chris Christie. I mean, if he can avoid more incidents like the kind in Belmar, where you're telling people to sit down and shut up, that plays well in New Jersey. I have to agree with Rand Paul that stuff does not necessarily travel well to the Deep South, where people are more polite, and also with female voters. They don't necessarily cotton to people who are perceived as bullies or unkind, at least traditionally, based on the polling we've seen.
Well, last question, guys. Will he resign to run for president, or can we expect him to finish out at least until he's elected or not reelected?
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who actually thinks Chris Christie would resign if he runs for president here in New Jersey. We ran a story recently. There was a Republican lawmaker that told us that in a conversation he had with the governor led him to believe that he had no plans to resign. We've written stories in recent few weeks and months that from political experts saying that the potential cost of it just the benefits of still being a sitting governor as you're running for president outweigh any downside to it. I mean, you get to control your message here in the state. If you were to resign and be running for president, you're going to have a bunch of folks looking to secede you, right? And then they get to control the message, and then you can't stand that they could possibly blame you for things when they're trying to bolster their own image. So, it would just be very surprising if he resigned, if he announces that he's running for president.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to fight a rearguard action either. I think I'd completely agree with Matt.
All right, well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Very talkative, informative chat. And join us probably next week or the week after that for another live chat. It's been fun. Until then, I'm Brent Johnson. Have a good afternoon, everyone.